Hello, my name is Daniel. Thank you for being here with me today. If you enjoy real, heartbreaking, cheating stories from Reddit, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It really means a lot to me. This is a story that's been haunting me ever since I read it. The story of loss, betrayal, and the silence left behind when the people we once trusted the most choose someone else. When Elliott was just 17, his life shattered in slow motion. His mother, Lynn, had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and for 2 long years she fought with all the strength she had. During that time, Elliott noticed his father, Walter, becoming increasingly absent. Walter was supposedly traveling for work, missing treatments, holidays, and hospital stays. So Lynn's sister, Aunt Julie, and their grandmother stepped in, cleaning the house, making meals, and holding Lynn's hand through the nights. And then she was gone, just like that. 2 years of pain, fear, and dwindling hope, over. Elliott was numb, his grief too heavy to put into words. That's when his father decided to introduce him to someone special. Her name was Cassandra, and she stood in their living room like she belonged there. Elliott, still only 19 at the time, exploded. He couldn't believe how quickly his father had moved on, how he could smile again when Lynn had only been gone 5 months. But nothing could have prepared him for what came next. Walter told him that he and Cassandra had been together for 3 years. The business trips, the late nights, the cold shoulder had all been a cover for an affair. Walter had cheated while Lynn was dying. Elliott packed his things that night. He left without looking back and never stepped foot in that house again. Years passed. He built a quiet life in Milwaukee, far from the chaos of his childhood. He was 27 now, working in tech and only keeping in touch with Aunt Julie, the one person who had truly been there for him. Until last week. Julie called out of the blue. Her voice trembled, not with concern, but with expectation. She asked how he was doing, then slid in the real reason for the call. Walter was getting married to Cassandra. Julie said she thought it would be healing if Elliott attended the wedding, that it could help repair the relationship. But Elliott had already buried that relationship. "Why would I go? He's dead to me," he replied, voice low and bitter. There was a pause. Then another voice came through the line. Walter's. "Is that really how you feel about me?" Without a word, Elliott hung up. The betrayal hit him all over again, not just from his father, but from the one person he thought he could still trust. Julie had broken her promise not to tell Walter anything about him. He sent her a message, firm but pained, reminding her of that promise. She replied, calling him cruel for what he said. She said Walter was crushed and that Elliott should have moved on by now. He couldn't argue with her, not without breaking apart, so he blocked her instead. 2 days later, a wedding invitation showed up in his mailbox. Only Julie knew his address, and now his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Text after text, call after call, uncles, cousins, distant relatives he hadn't spoken to in years. They all wanted him to come to the wedding, to give Walter a chance. Some messages were gentle, some were vicious. One even accused him of being selfish, of being the reason Walter was thinking of canceling the wedding altogether. And then came the message from Cassandra. She said Walter was thinking of postponing the ceremony and that he just wanted to talk. Elliott stared at the screen. This woman had been a friend of his mother's. She knew about the cancer, she knew Lynn was dying, and still chose to betray her. He replied once, "It's not my fault if he cancels. I don't want anything to do with either of you." Silence followed, but the guilt didn't. Strangers who shared his blood were calling him an awful person, and part of him, some small broken part, started to wonder if maybe he was wrong. Maybe he was the problem. Maybe he was too angry, too bitter. But then he remembered Lynn's face during those last weeks, pale, tired, trying so hard to smile for her son, while Walter vanished into hotel rooms with someone who pretended to be her friend. No, Elliott wasn't the one who betrayed anyone. Still, the messages kept coming, demanding closure, demanding forgiveness, as if time alone could wash away what Walter did. And now Elliott was left wondering, was he heartless for refusing to go, or was he the only one who remembered what it meant to love someone, even when they were slipping away? Elliott knew he'd reached his limit the moment he saw Cassandra's name flash across his screen. The audacity of her message, the casual manipulation behind her words, almost made him laugh. His father was thinking of postponing the wedding, and it would mean so much if Elliott would just speak to him, as if one conversation could undo years of betrayal, abandonment, and grief. But what crushed him more was the constant pressure from all sides. Family members he hadn't heard from in years suddenly had opinions on how he should heal. His cousins, who never sent a card or a message when his mother passed, were now calling him selfish. His uncles, who once praised Lynn's strength, were now begging him to be the bigger person. Julie's betrayal cut the deepest. She had promised to keep his information private. Elliott trusted her with the fragile peace he had built for himself, the space he needed to heal. And yet she had handed his number to people who saw his pain as an obstacle to a wedding. They told him he was cruel for refusing to attend, that 6 years was long enough to let go, that Walter had changed, that Cassandra was family now. But none of them were there during the nights Elliott sat by Lynn's bed, holding her hand as she struggled to breathe. None of them saw her smile through the pain, trying to protect her son from the truth she must have suspected. And certainly none of them were around when Walter disappeared for entire weekends, claiming meetings and flights, while Cassandra whispered promises in his ear. He was done justifying his anger. So he started blocking every number, one by one. 39 calls and texts. He logged each one. Then he sent a final group message, a single paragraph explaining what Walter had done to Lynn and why he would never be welcome in Elliott's life again. Then silence. Except the silence didn't last. A few weeks later, Elliott received a visit he wasn't expecting. Julie's fiancé was waiting outside his apartment after work. His hands were in his pockets, eyes downcast, as if carrying the weight of someone else's sins. Elliott hesitated, but the man raised a hand, not in confrontation, but peace. He said, "I just wanted to talk." Elliott nodded, but didn't invite him in. The man explained that after Elliott's mass text, everything erupted. Several cousins, who hadn't known the full story, confronted Walter and Cassandra. When they admitted the timeline, the arguments began. Some of the cousins withdrew from the wedding entirely, disgusted by what they heard. Cassandra, furious at the unraveling of her carefully managed narrative, started banning anyone who questioned her from attending. Family, friends, even members of her own bridal party. "She's blaming it all on you," the fiancé said quietly. Elliott let out a bitter laugh. He hadn't even left his apartment, but somehow he'd managed to expose everything they'd tried to bury. The wedding. he was told would still go on, but it would be a fractured, hollow event. And Walter, he was still considering postponing, still torn between guilt and the image of control he'd worked so hard to maintain. When Elliott asked why Julie had really made that call, the fiancée sighed. She thought it would make the family look bad if you didn't show up, that's all. She didn't care how you felt, just how it looked. The words stung more than Elliott expected. For a moment, he'd hoped Julie had acted out of some kind of misguided love. But it had never been about him, not really. "I won't be speaking to her again," Elliott said. The fiancé nodded. "I figured. I just thought you deserved to know." Elliott thanked him and walked upstairs alone. He didn't cry that night, but he didn't sleep either. He'd spent so long holding in the grief that it felt like a second skin now, something he wore, something people expected of him. But grief wasn't the only thing left. Anger, sorrow, betrayal, they all twisted together into something that sat in his chest like a stone. He wasn't okay. He missed his mother more than he could say, and even though Julie had betrayed him, he missed her too. He missed what she used to be, the one adult who stood by him when his father disappeared. But now she was just another face on the other side of a line he couldn't cross anymore. For the time being, Elliott was staying with his girlfriend, Nina. She made him laugh with ridiculous, over-the-top schemes to ruin the wedding, ideas she would never act on, but ones that let Elliott release a little pain through humor. One night, she joked about releasing rats at the reception. Another night, she pitched hiring a flash mob of sad clowns. It was all nonsense, but it was the first time in a long time that Elliott had smiled and meant it. Still, he knew this wound was far from healed. And that's why he made a decision, one that took more courage than all the blocking and walking away had. He booked an appointment for therapy. Because grief wasn't the only thing inside him anymore, and he was ready to face all of it. After Elliott sent that final group message, detailing every ounce of truth he'd kept buried for years, he blocked all 39 numbers. The silence that followed was jarring. For the first time in weeks, his phone didn't buzz. No more guilt-laced messages, no more pleas disguised as demands. He even changed his number, but kept the old phone active and tucked away in a drawer, just in case anyone tried to reach him again from some unknown line. It was a quiet precaution, a sign of how far he'd come. Nothing happened. For a few days, it seemed like everything was finally over. But peace has a way of being temporary. One evening, about a week later, Elliott pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex just as the streetlights blinked on. He froze when he saw someone standing by the entrance, hands in his coat pockets, pacing. It was Julie's fiancé, Alan. Elliott's chest tightened. He didn't know what Alan wanted, but he wasn't ready for another confrontation. Still, Alan lifted his hand as Elliott approached, and the gesture was calm, almost apologetic. "I'm not here to argue," Alan said gently. "I just thought you deserved to know what's been happening." Elliott didn't invite him in, but nodded for him to speak. They stood there under the soft yellow glow of the parking lot lights, the hum of traffic in the background like a distant storm. According to Alan, Elliott's message had torn through the family like a blade. Cousins who hadn't known the truth began asking questions. When Walter and Cassandra tried to deny the timeline, someone else came forward and confirmed it. That was all it took. The cracks widened and the fighting began. Some of the cousins dropped out of the wedding entirely. The truth, the affair, the timing, the betrayal, spread beyond the family. Friends of Lynn's, once close to both Walter and Cassandra, heard what had happened and backed out too. Cassandra unraveled. "She's blaming you," Alan said, not unkindly. "She thinks you did this on purpose." I let out a hollow laugh. "I told the truth." Alan nodded. "I know, but she's spiraling. She's banning anyone who brings it up from the wedding. Family, friends, doesn't matter. Walter, apparently, had considered postponing everything again, but Cassandra issued an ultimatum. If he did, she'd leave him. Elliott felt nothing at that revelation. Not triumph, not sorrow, just an empty echo of what used to be hope. "And Julie?" he asked quietly. Alan hesitated. "There was a conversation about how it would look if you weren't at the wedding. That's when she offered to call you. I didn't agree with it, but she went ahead anyway." There it was. Elliott had wondered if there had been love behind Julie's decision. Now he knew the truth. It wasn't about him at all. It was optics. "I'm done with her," Elliott said, "and I'm sorry, but that includes you too." Alan nodded, his voice low. "I understand. I just wanted you to know what really happened." Then he left. Elliott stood there alone, the air heavy with everything unsaid. He walked up to his apartment, numb again. The sense of betrayal from Julie was worse than he'd expected. He'd loved her, trusted her, but she had made her choice, and now so had he. He wasn't okay, not really. He missed his mom more with each passing day, and even though it hurt to admit it, he missed who his aunt used to be, too. The woman who held his hand at the funeral, who let him cry in her lap at night. But that person was gone, replaced by someone who cared more about saving face than protecting what was left of him. Thankfully, Nina was waiting for him inside, his girlfriend, his anchor in all of this. She'd been trying to cheer him up in the only way she knew how, through absurd, over-the-top ideas that made him laugh despite everything. Her latest plan involved sneaking into the wedding and releasing a dozen rats she claimed she could easily catch at the landfill. Another day, she suggested crashing the ceremony dressed as the ghost of his mother, with a veil and fog machine. Of course, they were only jokes, but each ridiculous scenario helped chip away at the sorrow, just a little. Elliott had no intention of showing up. He wouldn't be anywhere near that church. The wedding could go on, break apart, or never happen. It didn't matter to him anymore. Still, something was shifting in him. The anger, the grief, the loneliness, they had all lived inside him for too long. And some of the comments he'd read, encouraging him to try therapy, had finally settled deep in his thoughts. So he booked a session, just one for now. He was terrified. Vulnerability never came easy for him. But he also knew that healing didn't happen in silence. There were wounds inside him that even time hadn't touched. And maybe, just maybe, it was finally time to let someone help him stitch them closed. The pain of watching her child suffer was something Noelle never imagined she'd face so directly, especially not from people who were supposed to be family. It started with a bruise, a faint one on her daughter Amelia's upper arm, the size of a thumbprint. Noelle had noticed it when she was helping her change into pajamas after a weekend visit with her father, Troy. At first, Amelia flinched and brushed it off, but something in her eyes, something hesitant, quiet, and far too old for a 10-year-old, made Noelle stop and press gently. That's when the truth spilled out. Troy's 15-year-old stepson, Caleb, had been hurting her, kicking her, hitting her, even pushing her down the stairs once, though she didn't fall far. He'd call her names and take her things. And her half-sister, only a year younger than Amelia, was no better, constantly stealing from her, laughing when she cried, siding with Caleb when things got ugly. Noelle could barely keep her voice steady when she called Troy. She laid it all out, what Amelia said, the bruise, the bullying, and Troy's response made her stomach turn. "They're just kids being kids," he said dismissively. "She needs to toughen up." When Noelle pressed harder, Troy sighed. "I need to give my other kids more attention right now. If Amelia can't handle that, maybe she shouldn't come over anymore." That was the moment the last thread of patience inside Noelle snapped. She reminded him, firmly, bitterly, that he was failing their daughter, that his new life wasn't an excuse to abandon the one person who still looked up to him. She told him his other kids weren't her concern, but Amelia's safety was. Troy hung up. Minutes later, a text came through from his new wife, a barrage of words accusing Noelle of being an antagonist, of trying to sabotage their blended family. She insisted her children weren't Noelle's responsibility, and how dare she say anything about them? Noelle didn't respond. She just stared at the screen, wondering how far someone's heart had to rot to ignore a child's pain like this. And yet, Noelle still blamed herself. She hadn't known. Had Amelia kept this to herself out of fear, out of love for a father who barely returned her calls unless it was his designated weekend? In the comments of her anonymous post online, someone said, "If I found out a 15-year-old boy was bullying my 10-year-old daughter, I'd have words and fists with his father." It brought Noelle a strange, small comfort to read that. She wasn't overreacting. She wasn't being dramatic. She was being a mother. She sat down with Amelia the next day and gently asked if she wanted to keep visiting her dad. Amelia hesitated, then nodded. "I still love him," she whispered, "even if I don't think he loves me." No child should ever say that. No child should wonder if their father's silence is a reflection of their worth. That same night, Noelle texted Troy one final time. She told him he had two choices. He could visit Amelia somewhere safe, away from his house and his new family, or he could stop seeing her altogether, and she would seek full custody. Troy replied, short and cold, "Go ahead. I don't care. I've got my real kids now." Noelle stared at that message for a long time, her hands trembling. Then she took screenshots and forwarded them to her friend who worked as a family attorney. She also told Troy she would be pressing charges against Caleb for physical assault. He never responded. A few days later, she asked Amelia something she had been terrified to voice: whether Caleb's bullying had anything to do with race. Noelle was black. Troy and his new family were white. The thought had haunted her, but she hadn't dared ask. Amelia didn't understand at first. Then slowly she remembered something. "He called me the N-word once," she said, confused. "I didn't know it was bad." Noelle's breath caught. She tucked Amelia into bed, kissed her forehead, and waited until her daughter was asleep before falling apart in the hallway. That night, she contacted her lawyer again. Any hesitation she had about pressing charges disappeared. Racism, abuse, neglect. This wasn't just a custody issue anymore. It was protection. The court papers went out soon after. Troy's calls and texts followed, angry and panicked, but Noelle ignored them. She didn't owe him anything, not explanations, not apologies, not grace. Weeks passed, then months, and finally a judge ruled in her favor. Noelle was granted full custody of Amelia. Child support was increased, and most importantly, her daughter was now attending therapy. Slowly, Noelle saw the light return in her eyes. The heaviness in her posture began to lift. They even managed to recover a few of Amelia's belongings, things her half-sister had taken from Troy's house. They were small victories, but they mattered. Noelle wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, it felt like it might be theirs to rebuild without anyone else's permission. Noelle had tried to prepare herself for the final confrontation, but nothing could have softened the edges of what unfolded across that cold, polished table. Troy had agreed to meet in public, a neutral coffee shop downtown. She chose the spot deliberately, hoping the setting would keep things calm. But as soon as she arrived, he was already there, tapping his foot, arms crossed, eyes dark with accusation. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Why are you taking my daughter away from me?" he demanded, loud enough for a few heads to turn. Noelle sat down slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. "Because you've abandoned her, emotionally, physically, and morally. Because you let her be hurt under your roof and you did nothing." He exploded. His voice rose, words sharpened, accusations flew, things about her being manipulative, vindictive, impossible. He shouted until a barista came over and asked them to keep it down. Noelle didn't cry. She just sat still, hollow, watching the man she once trusted unravel in front of her. Later, she found out, through a friend, that Troy had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder years ago. He'd never told her, never mentioned it, never sought help. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained the chaos, the mood swings, the sudden withdrawals, the wild swings from affection to cruelty. And the chaos didn't stop after that meeting. Troy began showing up unannounced, at Amelia's school, at Noelle's apartment building. He stood outside the gates yelling her name. Security had to escort him away more than once. Then the texts began, fluctuating between desperate pleading and cold detachment. "I'm glad you got custody," one message read. "I hope you're proud of yourself," another said an hour later. Noelle stopped reading them. Despite everything, life slowly began to take shape again. Amelia was thriving at therapy, smiling more. She got back a few of the things her half-sister had taken, small comforts, but ones that seemed to matter deeply to her. Noelle shared a quiet update online, just a thank you to those who had offered her strength through it all. She still couldn't believe how quickly the court process had moved. Someone asked, "How did you get custody so fast?" She answered honestly, "He didn't even fight it, so they gave it to me." There was sadness in that too, not because she wanted a long, ugly battle, but because Troy's indifference spoke louder than any argument could. He let her go without hesitation, without even a word in court. And then, as if life couldn't twist the knife any deeper, another story surfaced in Noelle's orbit. A post from a teenage girl who was just days away from her 17th birthday. Her name was Layla, and she was a twin, but her brother had died within hours of their birth. Layla had grown up surrounded by grief she never caused but could never escape. Every birthday, instead of being celebrated, she was memorialized. 2 candles for year 2, 3 for year 3, always doubled, always shared with someone who had never made it out of the hospital. At 8, she questioned it. At 16, she started to resent it. That year, she had been hospitalized on her birthday. Her grandfather, the one person who always seemed to understand, showed up at her bedside with a gift. And for the first time, he said, "Happy birthday, Layla," and didn't mention her brother. Layla realized in that moment how much she needed that. To be seen, not as a shadow of someone who had passed, but as a living, breathing girl with her own heart, her own grief, her own pain. So this year, when her grandfather asked what kind of cake she wanted, she made a quiet, firm request. Just 17 candles. For me. The fallout was instant. Her parents overheard. They stormed in, furious. How could she erase her brother? How dare she be so selfish? She tried to explain, "He's not here, but I am. I'm the one still waking up each morning, still aching to feel loved for who I am." But her words got lost in a whirlwind of yelling. The fight ended with her in tears, her grandfather leaving with her, and her parents calling her self-centered. Layla had been crying ever since, hiding at her grandfather's house, wrapped in layers of guilt she didn't deserve. Reading Layla's story hit Noelle harder than she expected. It reminded her that grief, when left unspoken and unhealed, can warp into something cruel, something that denies the living their right to be whole. Whether it was a father abandoning a daughter or parents clinging so tightly to the memory of a son they forgot the daughter still in front of them, the result was the same. Children left behind, begging to be seen, begging not to disappear in someone else's shadow. Noelle closed her laptop and sat quietly for a long time that evening. The ache never fully faded, but the clarity remained. Some stories you live, others you carry. Both leave a mark. And both remind you, surviving doesn't mean you weren't broken. It just means you're still here. Layla sat on the edge of her grandfather's couch, her knees drawn up to her chest, a blanket draped loosely over her shoulders. It was supposed to be her 17th birthday, just hers. But instead of laughter or cake, she was sifting through the aftermath of another storm she hadn't asked for. Her parents had called her selfish, heartless. They told her she was erasing her brother by not wanting to share her birthday anymore. But to Layla, it wasn't about forgetting him. It was about remembering herself. For years, her birthdays had felt more like funerals, quiet, heavy affairs with candles that weren't hers, and songs that mourned instead of celebrating. No matter how brightly she smiled, she always felt like the afterthought in someone else's grief. Her grandfather's quiet understanding was the only warmth she had now. His gentle support was the first real acknowledgement she'd ever felt. Maybe she wasn't wrong for wanting something that belonged to her alone. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't ungrateful, just tired of being invisible. In real life, grief and memory often leave lasting imprints on the way families interact, especially after tragedy. While honoring a loved one is important, it should never come at the cost of someone else's identity or mental well-being. Children in particular need space to form their own memories, separate from the sorrow of others. If you are in a situation where your feelings are repeatedly dismissed or overshadowed by family grief, know that it's okay to set boundaries, even with the people who raised you. Therapy can be a powerful tool for both healing and communication, especially when guilt and loyalty make it hard to speak up. Recognize that honoring yourself is not betrayal, it's survival. And sometimes the first step to healing is finally blowing out your own candles, just yours, and letting yourself be celebrated for who you are, not for the absence you were born into.